to the Rant Live. Hey, hi. How are you doing?
Good. It's been a while.
It's almost like 2 weeks. It's the 23rd was the last time we had a show. It's sorry to everybody who
3 weeks.
Yeah. And I mean, I know there's a lot of people out there that are, that wait for this show. Like,
especially with Cubs baseball being in the state that it's in.
Yeah.
There's so much to be excited about with the Cubs right now.
We are one of the few sources of entertainment around the Cubs when you think about it.
Or the city of Chicago. Well, the Bears are actually playing a little bit better, but boy, White Sox kind of yeah. And again, they made it. They were certainly better than the Cubs. I am not, and so it's funny because people get all bent out of shape about stuff, right? So I don't want anybody getting bent out of shape. But like the Sox didn't necessarily have a very good showing there. They just got shellacked for the most part. They had the one big game. But I'm even more excited that the Brewers just absolutely got boat raced there.
The playoffs have gone, for me, they've gone really well. I mean, the Brewers look terrible. The Cardinals are out. Hopefully the Dodgers lose on Thursday to the Giants. Every team I wanted to win or lose, as the case may be, has done just that so far.
Yeah, I would have preferred that the Dodgers had just lost last night to have been eliminated completely. Yeah. But it is, I mean, it does set up for a really cool Game 5. Elimination games are always great. However, it would be like I am kind of the paranoid fan to where I fear the worst more than I hope for the best. And certainly this cannot compare to Giants fans, but like I look at it like it would be so much worse for the Dodgers to win in San Francisco, having been down 2-1 initially, than it would be just for So I fear that more than I'm hopeful that the Dodgers or that the Giants will win. I stuttered through that pretty badly, but that's always my thing. Is my fandom is often driven by fear. That's why it's almost better when the Cubs aren't in it, just for my mental state, because I don't have that overwhelming anxiety all the time that my team is going to lose and what'll happen if that goes. But it's been a really fun playoffs. I mean, those, you've had some really the Rays and Red Sox had a really exciting one. The wild card games were great. It's come down, and there's been big moments, outside of a few blowouts here and there. These games have been really, really cool. So I've enjoyed watching. Or last night, I just sat outside. I wasn't even drinking, which I usually do by the fire, but I was just I had the baseball games up on my radio feed, through MLB app, and I just sat out by the fire. It was a nice, cool night, and I listened to the games. So that was
nice.
Pretty fun.
Old school. Old school.
Yeah.
So so the Astros take on the Red Sox in the ALCS. Who you got there?
Oh man. I don't really care for either of them. I think the Red Sox, for as much as their fans are a little bit overbearing, the Red Sox kind of as an organization aren't as off-putting to me as the Astros. I do have a belated soft spot in my heart for Dusty Baker. I'd like to see him get it done. That'd be kind of cool with them, because I mean, he's like, the dude is all he's done is manage winning teams for like the last 50 years. It feels like, right? So so that's cool. But then Schwarber with the Red Sox, I think that would be cool to see him kind of make good on a lot of us being upset that he was gone. So I just, like, this sounds really bad. I want to see a really good series. That's all I want, is like, I want both of those teams. I want the Giants to ultimately win the whole thing. So what I would like is for the teams in the ALCS to just beat each other up and burn through a ton of pitchers and have to use up a bunch of innings so that they're tired and maybe worn out by the time the World Series comes around. That's really my hope. It's just really good baseball. That's it. I don't really care who wins.
Okay. Yeah. I get what you're saying on all fronts there. I tend to go with the Red Sox just because, they feel more like the American League version of the Cubs. I mean, they've got, kind of one other old stadium, park, whatever you want to call it, in baseball. And I kind of just like Boston. I don't know. So that's why I would go with the Red Sox. Plus the Astros, I don't want them to feel like they vindicated themselves, from the cheating that they did. They
Of course, the Red
did.
Sox were also involved
True.
in the cheating stuff, and they had the iWatch or the iWatch. Yeah. Is that what they were using?
Was that 2019?
Apple Watch, and then some other stuff. And then you got, Cora, who was with the Astros. So it's like these are both the teams that were hammered the most for the cheating stuff, and yet here they are again. So I want to point this out. It's very interesting, right? So tie this back to the Cubs just a little bit before I continue, and I didn't want to step on that, but I want to get this out while I'm thinking about it, is that, if you recall, Ryan Tepera, who's now with the White Sox, kind of slammed the Astros like, well, we all know, what they've been caught up with, and we know how well they've done at home. So, maybe, and he kind of ran his mouth. Well, then Carlos Correa was asked about that after the game, after the Astros won. He's like, well, this is what happens when you just, and I'm kind of paraphrasing, but he said when you make baseless accusations, because he said we had the highest team OPS on the road this year in all of Major League Baseball. So, maybe understand what you're talking about before you say it. And, by the way, we scored whatever, 6 runs in the game they lost, and we just scored 10 runs. He was like, we don't need to be at home with whatever you're trying to say our advantage is there to win and to score a lot of runs. So, maybe don't talk that trash. It's like, I don't think what Tepera said fired them up anymore, but it is one of those examples of like, it felt like a Facebook comment, where it's like somebody speaking out of school. And you're like,
alive.
You might want to look the stats up before you go running your mouth. And there you go. I mean, Tepera backed it up. He's been a really good pitcher this year, but it was just kind of silly. So again, to take it back around to kind of the cheating thing and all that, but it is kind of funny. But at the same time, I also go back to the Red Sox beating the Rays, people being like, nerds got beat. It's not about, well, okay. The Red Sox are being run by Chaim Bloom, who came from the Rays, who's got like a Yale education in philosophy or like the classics or some shit like that. He's a giant nerd. The difference is that the Red Sox are being run with nerds and they spend a bunch of money. The Rays are run by nerds and they have a $75 million payroll. Who the hell do you think's going to win more often? The nerds with money. And that's the whole thing. It was like, oh, be like the Rays. Cool. How many World Series titles do the Rays have? Exactly. How many does Boston have? Exactly. So at the end of the day, you can win on that shoestring budget, and the Rays do a lot of things really, really well. But as we talk about with the Cubs and with their pitching, we talk about not having any margin for error. Not spending money means you have zero margin for error. And once you get to the postseason, that starts getting messed up. So anyway, I just trampled all over your conversation about who you wanted to see win, and I took that off in a totally different direction. But those are a couple things I had to get off my chest.
Yeah, that's why we're here. Just to go off the rails and say whatever we really want to say. So well done. So the National League, we have, oh my God, the Dodgers and the Giants, obviously. Who's the other National League team? I'm blanking.
The Braves. Well, the Braves won. They're in the NLCS.
I don't think the Braves have a chance of beating either the Giants or the Dodgers.
That was definitely one of those things where, like the Braves, especially like, I don't know, man.
Good to see Jock get that home run, though.
Yeah, that was cool. With Anthony Rizzo's bat.
yeah, I know.
With another former Cubs bat, I was like, oh God, of course.
At least he's having some fun, so it's good to see.
He's a bad bitch. Former Cubs, he's got the pearl necklace going, and that's what he called himself. I'm not just calling him that. So but yeah, it was fun. I just and Freeman had the huge home run last night against Josh Hader. Like that was wonderful. I do not see them putting up much of a fight. I might end up eating my words, but like the Giants. Speaking of which, how bad did the Giants get screwed? Like, hey, congrats on winning 107 games. The Dodgers won 106, and now they won the wild card. Now you got to play them again after a full season together in that division.
They've got to fix that. It should be records. Yeah. That's foolishness. That should not happen. I mean, everybody wants to see the Dodgers and the Giants play, but let's see them play in the NLCS, not in the division round.
Well, and was that, am I making this up, or was that part of when they talked about the expanded postseason? There was something in there about, like the number one seed getting to pick, or was that something with the NBA where that was happening? I'm conflating a bunch of things right now, and with all the COVID stuff and the changes, but there is something to be said, right? And I get it. Like you say, well, the wild cards between the two non-division, but let's look at in 2015, the NL Central had the 3 best records in the National League. The Cubs had 97 wins and finished 3rd. There were 2 teams with 100 wins. And so you've got the 2 wild card teams ostensibly are better than the other 2 division winners were in the other 2 leagues. So it's like, if you win that division, right, if you have the best record, I kind of feel like you should get that choice. You say, okay, we want the wild card winner. Like, let it finish. Now, I know there's logistics involved in that. You got to get a planned flights and all that. So it probably doesn't work that way. But you look at it and say, okay, we either want the wild card winner or we want one of these other teams. Because think about it this way, too. Teams have very different makeups, and there might be one that's and it could be that way. The Dodgers might be a very, very good matchup for the Giants. I don't think that's the case, but you could look at it and say, we match up way better against this team, and we would rather play them. And, you say, well, where's your reward for winning a division title? Well, your reward is you didn't have to play in that wild card game. Your reward is you already are in the division series. So to me, the best record, let them pick. And it's one of those, you say, we want this one or this one. And go from there, because again, the Giants just get completely screwed. Even if they end up prevailing, I have to imagine that they would rather have faced probably the Braves. Honestly, they wouldn't have wanted to face the Brewers, but Jesus, how bad an egg did they lay?
Here's my take on that. And you kind of talked about the ALC, the American League teams beating up on each other, but I kind of feel like when you get to the postseason, it really becomes more of when good teams really take the best out of each other, and then whoever wins that series goes on to play another team, whoever it is, they end up just wailing them. And didn't that happen when was it the Boston Red Sox played the Yankees? Was that the year that Boston played the Rockies in the World Series? I remember the Rockies got rocked.
The Rockies went on that crazy run, and because they were they came out of nowhere, and then they got the wild card, and they just kept winning. And you're like, what the hell is this team?
And they got dumped.
Yeah, because they had nothing left at that point. They had to expend all their. It was the Cubs had to do that against in 2017, when they had to just they scratched and clawed and barely snuck past the Nationals. In that wild finish, and Wade Davis is his arm's about to fall off, and he's still trying to pitch, and they barely snuck through. And then it's man, they just didn't have. Again, we get back to my favorite thing ever, which is that margin for error. If you're not completely fresh anymore, and that's one thing that's going to be really kind of troublesome as you look at those games. And part of that, the Giants had the benefit of the doubt with the extra win in there, that they didn't have to have everybody go deep. But, man, they were having to burn through a bunch of dudes and throw a bunch of pitchers. I mean, they were using up literally everyone on the entire roster. And so that is just like what you mentioned. You go a 5-game series, and it is like Rocky IV, where you're just sitting there in the middle of the ring trading blows back and forth. And by the time you get done, you're just so punch drunk from it. It's going to be tough. So, the Braves – get the benefit of they kind of ran through the Brewers, other than the Brewers went the first game, and then it was 3 straight.
I kind of feel like when you've got 2 clearly superior teams that are playing each other and beating the crap out of each other, the winner of that series is going to just plow through the next opponent, being the Braves. I'd be surprised if the Braves won or even took it past.
I guess it depends.
5 games, but
it depends on how the Giants can set it up, because there are certain circumstances where you burn up enough guys. Now, there's part of its momentum, and you're like, oh God, okay, whew, we made it past that, and there's a measure of relief, and okay, Now we feel really good. Bam, we're going to get after them. And I do think that'll be the case. I think where you run into some trouble then is how does that happen in the World Series between what happens in those division or the championship series, because you do run the risk of if you kind of start running out of pitchers early and now you're barely catching up, right? It's like you're running out over your feet and you're almost losing your balance and you're just barely maintaining it. If you get tripped up early in a big series, that becomes really difficult because now you're trying to make up for that down the road. And so it's like remember Brandon Morrow threw all 7 games in the World Series, back, what was that? Right before he came to the Cubs.
Yeah.
Right. And that was 17, right? That was 17.
Then he got injured after that.
Yeah, and then he was like hurt the whole time, but it's like we're gonna throw you every damn game. But it's like the Cubs with Chapman in 16, where it's like, we are gonna ride the shit out of you, and we're gonna go until your arm falls off. We're gonna ride you hard, put you up wet, and then if you're broken after this, we don't care because you're not under contract with us anymore. And so you do see some of that.
I think if this postseason teaches us anything, it's the value of making the right trades to get your team over the top. And I mean, you see a lot of the teams that made trades, big trades, are out. I mean, like the White Sox made trades. They got Kimbrel. They did some things. I mean, there are other teams that made pretty big trades, and what it does is it makes me go back to 2016 when the Cubs traded for Chapman, and even in 17 when they traded for Quintana. And a lot of fans tend to want to kind of relitigate those trades, or just kind of, obviously now when you look at them, you're like, it's just terrible. But it's important to remember that making that right trade, the Quintana trade was obviously a bad trade, but the Chapman trade was a good trade because the Cubs won the World Series. And so if you can make trades all day long, and we see a lot of teams making trades that do not work. And then what do? They've got to kind of recircle the wagon, so to speak, for the next season. And we all know how tough that is to do, to keep the momentum going from year to year. And so I just think it's interesting to see, some of the teams that made some of those trades not really having success, and they're going to have to kind of regroup.
Yeah, although I would look at it and say, the Dodgers swung a massive trade to get Max Scherzer and Trey Turner.
Yeah.
And then how does that? Well, guess what? Well, now you're without Clayton Kershaw, but you've got the other guy who, among the 2 players who over the last 10 years would be considered the best pitchers of their generation, they have both of them. Well, now they only have one of them. But
I mean, those 2 players, though, are those are cornerstone pieces of any franchise.
But that's what I'm saying, though, is that they swung that, and they knew we've got to have starting pitching. We're going to have this, because even though, or like the Giants, right? A veteran team that have a bunch of dudes who have been there forever, which is weird because I was led to believe that you were not allowed to keep all your star core players into their aging years, because then that's bad. And they're no good anymore. But obviously the Giants with Brandon Belt and with Brandon Crawford and with Buster Posey, I was going to say he's not named Brandon. His name still starts with a B. And then they went out and got another guy whose name starts with a B in Chris Bryant. But veteran hitter, very versatile. Bryant started in center and third and first. Same thing he did with the Cubs, but they went out and got a guy. Again, they did that who fit. Or you look at the Red Sox getting Schwarber. Say, hey, lefty masher at Fenway? Hell yeah, we'll take that. And it's about, I think, whereas the White Sox, they went and got Craig Kimbrel, who is a stud closer and was pitching. Oh, but we've already got Liam Hendricks. So, hey,
that
Craig,
trade still makes no sense to me.
Man, which he doesn't like doing, which he said, and people can a lot of people dismiss this, right? But I think it shows up time and time again, and we've seen it with Kimbrel, and we saw it this year. Some guys are built. You have a cue mentally. This is what I do, and it was obvious that he just didn't work out for him as the setup man. That didn't make sense. And now, and I know there's talk, do they pick up his option? Do they not? Are they going to try to trade him? Which I suppose they could. But it's just, there again.
That trade made just no sense.
No, I still am surprised. I would get it if
Rick
you were
Hahn
going to make him the closer and say, hey, Liam Hendricks, you'll be here longer. We're going to have you set up for a while because as good as you are, this guy's better. And that's why we're making this trade, is to win a World Series. So set your ego aside, put a few shrimp on the bobby, and, be the setup man for this dude. For one, that was a horrible accent, by the way, but
it was.
Yeah.
Do you think Jed Hoyer convinced Rick Hahn that they owed the Cubs, which is why they made that trade? Because there's no logical sense. Even when the trade happened, it made no sense. But now retrospectively, it's just like
Cody Hoyer was better for the Cubs than Craig Kimbrell was for the White Sox. Just on the last couple months, the Cubs won that. And
the Cubs get Madrigal, who hasn't even played yet.
Who should be their starting second baseman moving forward. And it's funny because, that could take us into a few other things. So I won't take that much further. But just on paper, it was like, okay. A starting caliber 300 level, 300 hitter with great contact, because the Cubs, Lord knows, have not had a bunch of good contact hitters over the last several years. That we can have this guy for years, and you're going to take this dude off our hands because we don't need a closer because we suck so bad and he can't pitch for us anyway. And we're probably not going to be good next year. So we weren't going to pick up his option. So hell yeah, dude, give us two players who could be mainstays on our roster for the next 5 years. Yes, please. Like, that was just a no. And the two of them combined, Madrigal and Hoyer, aren't going to make as much money over the next 4 years as what Craig Kimbrell was due next year. So, but again, it's that whole, this is where the Tony La Russa thing is a little bit weird, because if you remember how much he soft pedaled, like, who's going to be the closer, and maybe it'll be one and the other. Like, he didn't want to just say Kimbrell is a setup man, right? He kind of said it'd be a little bit of both, but then they kept riding with Hendricks as a closer and Kimbrell as a setup, and it never worked. It just didn't fit well, and Kimbrell was downright bad at times. If you remember, like, when he pitched against the Cubs, he gave up a home run. The freaking Cubs after the trade deadline. So again, it just goes back to, like, closer was not a need they had, right? And clearly there were some things with Cody Hoyer that the Cubs figured out with him that the Ethan Katz and the White Sox either didn't want to figure out or couldn't do, which seemed like really basic, like just tweaking his grip just a little bit. I'm like, that was easy. But they went after this luxury that wasn't really a need that they had to solve. And then look what happened. They ran up against a team that was much more balanced and that had done a better job of roster construction, and they ended up getting their asses kicked. Again, 5-game series, that can go a bunch of different ways, but I think when you see teams that go and they say, we need this, like the Cubs said, we need, if we have a closer, a lockdown closer, that's the one piece we need to win this World Series, we're going to overpay to get that. And it worked. And I know a lot of people be like, well, they would have won without him. Well, no, they wouldn't have. You know why I know that? Because history tells us that they did win and they did have him. We cannot travel back in time in a DeLorean and replay it without him. So you can't go back and say they would have won without Chapman. That's not the way it works.
It's pretty difficult to think they would have won. I mean, you could look at a number of different situations, but
they
specifically
barely
Game 5. Yeah. Game 5 where he pitched, 2-3 innings, something like that.
Yeah, he threw like 150 pitches, and by the end, like, he was throwing only sliders because he had no gas on his fastball whatsoever. It was like just tossing them up. But yeah, it comes down to finding the pieces that make your team work. And in the Dodgers case, hell, we can go back to the Dodgers and say, well, they traded for Mookie Betts too, right? And they went out and got this. So the Dodgers are another example of nerds running the show with a bunch of money. And that's, you get that assistance there. You can gloss over a lot of those issues. You have payroll in there to go and get some of those. Now, the question for the White Sox is Jerry Reinsdorf going to open up the pocketbooks anymore? Because they're already at a point, like, they've never been anywhere close to the Cubs level of spending. But does he do what it takes? Because the White Sox are in a very similar position to where the Cubs were a few years ago. I'm not talking like 2016, or not even 2015, but more when the Cubs were at that point, right after 2017, when we knew, okay, hey, the offense broke somewhere along the lines. Theo Epstein said in 2018, right? They had a lot of issues that everyone could see clearly that they needed to address, and they continued to fail to do so, largely because they could not get enough more of the budget approved to be able to add those pieces accordingly to make the kind of moves they needed to. Do the White Sox end up in that same boat? Do they say, hey, we got this core, we got all these guys, we're going to try to run it back, and we believe we can do the same thing next year? Or do they get the money that it takes to go find those necessary pieces to make it work? And I'm not so sure they do. So I'm very interested to see what they do this offseason, but I think they're going to be a lot quieter than what they have been, certainly last year. We'll see.
Yeah. So when we start talking about the Cubs offseason plans, I mean, it's a guessing game really at this point. But when you look at the system, and we've had a number of posts and articles written on CubsInsider.com recently just about the system, obviously an ongoing topic of conversation. You kind of there's a lot of I don't want to say unproven guys in the system, but there's a ton of potential in the system that I don't think has necessarily risen to the top, so to speak. And so it's one of those things where are the Cubs going to be patient with the system and maybe just see how it plays out, knowing that, there are a lot of there's potentially a lot of major league kind of level talent there. But it's not quite definable yet. Do they let that kind of develop without doing anything real big in the offseason? I mean, obviously they have to fill out the active roster because they don't have a full roster right now. But short of just doing that with kind of plug and play kind of type cheap guys, do you really think they go after anyone like Carlos Correa? I know there's been a lot of talk around maybe bringing him in. To me, it feels like it doesn't feel like the right time to bring in a guy like Carlos Correa. I think it'd make more sense to just kind of fill out the roster, probably have another team that finishes under 500 next year. But at that point, in 2023, then you could look at your minor league guys and really have an understanding of who it is that's going to be that major league talent and who's not.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few different ways that we could look at it here. And on, I think the one area where we can almost guarantee they're going to lean really heavily on the farm system, and not pursue much in the in free agency market is probably the bullpen, right? I mean, when you're talking about guys like Ethan Roberts and Ben Leeper and Manny Rodriguez, who we saw up this year already, there's some others out there, possibly Scott Cobos, unless they want to stretch him back out in a starting role, but as a lefty. And then when you look at the guys they've already, they traded away Tepera, they traded away Chafin. I can't imagine. I mean, Trevor McGill, do they feel like they could work something out there and figure out what's going on there? Rex Brothers got to be gone. There's no way in hell they bring that dude back. He's ARB eligible, which is why he's 33 years old. He's still arbitration eligible, which kind of tells you a little bit of something right there. I can see them bringing Adam Morgan back, but instead of, what have they always done every year? How many dudes have they gone out there and signed for that bullpen, for a minor league or a major league minimum or on a minor league deal to try to load that up? There's no point in that, right? Because again, if you're not going to be very good, if you, I don't want to say very good, but if you're not wholeheartedly intent on competing next year, which I think there's a mix there. I still think they'll try to look at next year almost like I don't know how intent they were on competing in 2015. They didn't think they were going to be that good. I'm not saying they weren't trying to compete. There's no way they thought they were going to win 97 games, go to NLCS. That was definitely not the target for 2015.
Yeah, especially after the first half of the season. Sure.
Right. So you can bring those guys up because service time, and that may be changed with the CBA, right? But either way, you're not worried about service time with pitchers. You got to get those guys going. The last thing you need to do is let them sit in the minors and risk a possible injury to where now you're actually missing out on a full year of them. So I could see them really trying to lean heavily on that, which again is going to free up some money elsewhere. I think there's two different ways they go here. One would be short-term deals for maybe higher average annual value, or AAV for those who are keeping score at home, than maybe what those guys are going to get. So maybe you lure them there on a 2-year deal instead of maybe they thought they could get 3 or 4 somewhere else. But instead of making $8 million a year, they're making 10, right? So they're guaranteeing more up front, and you can get them in there because the Cubs have very little committed. They could do that. It's a bridge. Those guys are now gone. They're not blocking the way for dudes like, Ed Howard or Alexander Canario or some of those who we expect to maybe take another 2 years or 3 to come up. That's one option. But on the topic of Correa, and I brought this up, I wrote about it today, actually, right before this. He is of the big ticket guys, a lot of whom are going to be so like one I don't think they'll target is Marcus Strowman, and we could talk about that if we need to, but I could see Correa for this reason. He only just turned 27 at the end of September. So you're talking about a dude, let's say 33, 34, and with the way guys keep in shape now, I think, aging is a little bit different, even with the exception of the steroid years when aging was not a factor at all. You look at that dude and you say, you've got at least 5 good years left. And that was the issue with some of these dudes that they had signed before. Of course, Hayward was 26, and we thought he'd have like 5 or 6 good years left. So a little bit different there. But he plays a premium position, plays shortstop. Cubs need a shortstop because, A, Nico Horner, even if he's healthy, which we have not seen to be guaranteed, probably not the dude you want being your everyday shortstop. Defense is questionable at best, but he's a good enough athlete that he can play all over. So now, contact bat, plays all over the field, not great at any one spot. Hey, there's your Ben Zobrist, only much younger and cheaper. He can play all over the place, fits that profile. But if you go get your shortstop, I know they've got a ton of dudes coming up through the system who are shortstops, but guess what shortstops do? They can move all over. And as PKF notes here in the comments, Correa could shift over to third if his athleticism kind of shades a little bit. And if one of these guys comes up, again, if it's Christian Hernandez, if it's Ed Howard, and they force him off of short, you can do that. Gary Sheffield started out as a shortstop, right? So shortstops can move. One of these guys puts on 30 pounds of muscle, all of a sudden he becomes a corner outfielder. You want a lock that you can't sit there and say, we hope this dude who played in the complex league this year or who played at low A, we hope that in 3 years he will be our starting shortstop. So we're going to wait on this core piece for 3 or 4 years because this guy might be ready. No, they didn't do it with Gleyber Torres. That's for sure. That's why they traded him away. You lock that up. You get that guy who's going to hold down that position, who will play, and both Correa and the other one is Seager. Both of those dudes, Seager actually has better contact numbers than Correa, but they're not high strikeout dudes. Plus, they have good power. Correa led all major league shortstops in defensive runs saved. He was 5th in the def metric on Fangraphs, and he was up. I think he was 6th in UZR per 150. So we're talking about an elite level defensive player at shortstop, and so he fits all these needs. So even if you're not going to be very good for a year or two, he's still there, still producing at a very high level when you're ready to. So it's, again, if you're going to go big, it's Correa, who I think makes he makes a little bit more sense than Seager. Just maybe I don't like the Dodgers or whatever, but if they were going to do it, that's the way they go. Otherwise, I think they have to overpay for a couple guys on shorter contracts and then hope that those prospects do come along and are ready to compete meaningfully. But that would also mean that they're probably looking at a longer window. And Hoyer has said it's going to be a quick one. I mean, this is what he said. How truthful that is, I don't know. But it just depends on it. Are you saying we got one more kind of transitional year and then we're going to go for it? Or are you looking at like 2 to 3 more transitional years and then go for it? And if it's the latter, they're going to have to really do some business on the ticket side of things and cutting some prices and making some other moves because
that's not going to happen.
No,
they're not going to go backwards on that.
Yeah, that'll be bad news. If they're not meaningfully competitive for 2 or 3 more years, that's a problem. It's already a problem.
I mean, they might lock in ticket prices and kind of play that as a gift to fans, but I don't see them going backwards on ticket prices at all. No. Particularly given what we've seen Ricketts do over the past several years. Let me ask you a question. In either of those 2 scenarios, what happens? Let's say the Cubs are, just a couple games out of first place come the trade deadline. In either of those scenarios, do you think they could become buyers?
I think they could, and I think part of what
they've got a lot of capital.
I mean, the Cubs and the Cardinals were not separated by much when it came down to the trade deadline. Right?
But look, you're using the Cardinals for an example. Look at what they got kicked out right out.
Right, but they made it, right? And it's not like they went out. They didn't go out and make. I mean, what they got? John Lester and Jay Happ. I mean, it's like 2, 55-year-old pitchers or something. To add Adam Wainwright. They had like the oldest rotation anybody's ever seen, which is kind of funny. And Waino, speaking of which, is getting what, 18.5 next year, 17.5. They just re-signed him more money for next year, which is insane.
Yeah, that's crazy.
He and Yachty are going to pitch there or have a battery there till they're 50.
They're going to be using walkers to have the mound visit.
Figure out how to get out there. But they do. But I guess the point is, and I'm not saying the Cubs would have done this, but we didn't see. Nolan Arenado kind of wasn't really carrying the team very much, and Paul Goldschmidt had kind of struggled a little bit early, and they were not in a great position early on. Then all of a sudden, they just caught fire and won like 54 games in a row, and all of a sudden they vault into playoffs. Now again, they got bounced really quickly, and that's what can happen. But I think the Cubs may have learned a little bit of a lesson from that. And again, granted, the Cardinals were in a different spot, right? They didn't have a bunch of it wasn't like Arenado and Goldschmidt are on the last year of their deal and they had to be traded, or they're going to, we're not going to re-sign them. We're not talking extensions with anybody. I mean, shit, they re-signed their 40-year-old pitcher for another year already, right? So, and their payroll's different. It's a different situation, but the short answer is yes. I mean, I could see them if somehow things come together the right way and they make a couple of those moves. I think you'd be looking at some short term, because again, though, if we go through there and you look at where they have all that depth position player wise, and you're looking at all those shortstops, you're thinking, okay, even if we can move these guys, like not all of these guys are going to make it up to the big leagues. And if they do, it's going to be all over the place. We think we have some more depth over here. Or, hey, what if they sign? Okay, let's look at it this way. They sign Wilson Contreras to an extension. All of a sudden, that changes things fairly dramatically for Miguel Amaya, because you're not keeping a top prospect around to be a backup catcher if they sign Contreras to, say, a 5-year extension, right? I think at that point, then you're looking at, we thought that with Caratini for a while, but that could have changed. So there are things that could happen this winter that would precipitate, again, I think that, or would set the stage better for them to be buyers if that stuff changes in a certain way. I think if not, if you're sitting there in flux, and if Contreras hasn't been signed to an extension, well, then hell no, they're not going to be buyers, because they're going to, if they haven't already traded that dude, then he's going to get moved, because they're going to have to move everything that isn't nailed down yet again and kind of retool one more season. So,
and the term buyers, it's really defining buyers is, I mean, the way the Cubs were buyers when they traded for Quintana, for example, that was we feel like this is the move that's going to put us over the top type of trade and what you gave up, versus what the Cardinals did to get Lester and who else did you say they added? J.A. Happ.
And those were very decidedly short-term assets to help build the back of the bullpen, versus a guy who you thought would be your number 2 starter for 3 years to come. And
exactly.
And
so
clearly that didn't work out very well.
But the problem with the Cubs really right now is that they need starting pitching, and you can really see a situation where they go into next season and maybe they are able to win and put themselves in a decent position come the trade deadline based on moves they get players they bring in on the offensive side of things. But they're going to have to bring in pitchers for sure. But I just don't see any situation where they're going to have the staff to support a deep playoff run. Without trading away a lot of players.
I mean, the way, so Hoyer said specifically they're targeting power arms. I mean, and David Ross indicated that they probably need about 2. I mean, right now, Kyle Hendricks is the only pitcher who is set for the rotation. They have not guaranteed us, I mean, there might only be one spot between Keegan Thompson and Justin Steele and Adbert Alzolay. I mean, that's entirely possible. Now, those things could change based on who they sign. But the issue, and maybe you read this, but I'll throw it out there. What was the average fastball velocity of the Cubs rotation in 2021? I
did read that. I think it was like 88 miles an hour.
This is like 89.6, okay. I think.
And the average of MLB
they
was
are
91?
The only about the next lowest was 91. I think the average was like 92, 93, somewhere in that neighborhood. There's been no other rotation in Major League Baseball that's averaged under 90 miles an hour since 2016. Oddly enough, that was the Astros who are more known for their velo, which is kind of interesting. But at no point in the last 5 years has the Cubs rotation averaged as much as 91 miles an hour on their fastball. The last time they did average over 91 was in 2016. Do you care to remind the listeners what happened, John, in 2016 for the Chicago Cubs?
I seem to recall they won it all.
That is correct. And so I'm not saying that, like, if you throw harder as a rotation, you will win, but I've mentioned margin for error a lot.
It helps. Yeah.
And when you remove more and more of that each year, and when you are the slowest rotation in baseball by a wide margin, and that's an issue. And here's the maddening thing. We've all known it's an issue for this whole time. Everybody can see it. Oh, the Cubs don't throw very hard. They don't have a bunch of hard throwing guys. And yet they still haven't addressed this. Now Hoyer's like, hey, we're finally going to address this. And we're all like, yeah, no shit. You should have been doing this for the last 6 years. But let's say they go find a guy. And now the issue is, does Noah Syndergaard get a qualifying offer? How does that work? Do they go after that? But you go and you find a Noah Syndergaard. You get somebody else who's a hard thrower who misses bats. Now all of a sudden you put yourself in a position to where you've at least got the framework. Because the thing is, that rotation they had, like Hoyer flat out said, our starting rotation was not competitive. They were not good enough to win. And so it doesn't matter what else you have, because if you can't go into it, you certainly don't have 5 guys who can compete. There's no way in hell you're going in against any of these other teams in the playoffs and saying we're gonna be able to compete against them because we can miss bats and do all this stuff. So if they do that, if they manage to get a couple guys who can really pump gas, round out that rotation better, and then you slot somebody like an Alzolay and or Steele and or Thompson, one of those guys gets a starting spot. The other 2 now become kind of your long relievers, your swingmen. They all throw hard. Now you've got guys in that bullpen that can miss bats, along with, as I mentioned before, Leaper and Roberts and Rodriguez, who are all throwing mid to upper 90s and touching triple digits. Now you've got a whole staff of dudes who can throw hard and miss bats when it's required. And you got Rowan Wick on the back end. And most of them are together for a while. Like it sets up so much better that you don't have to go out and score 8 runs every time. And if you only score 1, you're screwed. So that's what I want to see them build up that rotation and maybe even get a little risky on it, because there again, if you're not really, even if you're not really planning to compete next year, you can get a guy in there on a pillow deal who you're saying, hey, we're willing to overpay for a year and give you a chance to get a soft landing, maybe rebuild your value and walk into a bigger contract next year, whether it's with us or somewhere else. But that guy isn't concerned whether it's Noah Syndergaard, maybe somebody else who's been hurt. They're not necessarily looking for the place where can I win this season. They're looking for where can I go that they've got a guaranteed spot for me. They're going to pay me money. I get to go out every 5th day and show my ability. And so I think those possibilities are out there. That's what I would like to see them do is get a little risky, man. Get aggressive, even if it is only for a short term, and lay some money down, because you know they've got tons of payroll room, even if they don't go above $125 million. They got like 60 or 70 million they could spend and still be at 125. So we'll see.
Yeah. And then you've got the guys that are on the current roster that, you mentioned Wilson Contreras. He's probably the first guy that comes to mind as someone who's, obviously his last year of arbitration, I think, is this year, right? And then he terms out and becomes a free agent after 2022, I believe. And so in that particular situation, obviously if the Cubs are winning, it's hard to imagine that they would trade Contreras, but you never know. But how likely is Cubs to?
Hey, we never reply to comments. I'm pretty sure. Didn't this person didn't you get banned for something a while back, or just being weird? I don't know.
Yeah, there's been so many of those.
But to
what are the
address
chances
that, like, we
that
don't
they
have an inside track on
trade?
the GM. But anyway, I'm sorry.
What are the chances that they trade a player like an established player who, at this point, really the one guy that comes to mind is Wilson Contreras? What are the chances? I mean, they're either going to trade Wilson Contreras or they're going to sign him to an extension. And as we've seen, they're not real great at signing players to extensions.
The problem there is, if they were going to trade him, the ship has sailed on where the big value is with that, because now he's down to only a year. Like, if you were going to move him, like we just saw them have to move guys. And I think they actually came out with some of that fairly well. But if you were going to do that, it should have been done last year, or or a year and a half ago, or whatever. When
you wave the white flag,
value, because now at this point you're like, all right, well, what are you going to do? And I think the other troublesome part, this is what I've said the whole time, is like now he's 30 years old, right? He's past he's certainly not past the expiration date. Because we've seen some catchers, who are older and doing perfectly well, but it's just a weird setup. If you were to sit back on that and then like wait and you don't work out an extension, now you trade him with half a season left, you trade him at the deadline to get very little value back. Like, what was the point? If you weren't going to compete, you were just going to sell off. Now, what the hell are you doing? And we've already seen them move these other guys. So that's the thing, is it's not as if like the Band-Aid got ripped off long ago. So it's not like we're sitting here waiting on something. And we already saw them move a backup catcher in Victor Caratini, who ended up being really, really awful with San Diego, so it wasn't that bad. But that was kind of that deal too, where I thought, well, one way or the other, you got to move one of these guys, because Caratini was legitimately a starting caliber type. Now, he would flash hot and cold, but hey, switch hitter, obviously handled the staff well. Darvish loved him. But yeah, I just think that would be odd. But the other issue now is, unless we haven't seen Amaya in like a year. I mean, he's been injured pretty much the entire season and has had a little bit of difficulty with his offensive consistency. Unless they believe that he's healthy and ready to step right in, and you trade Contreras, like that's really a white flag move, because now who the hell's your catcher? You're gonna run with Robinson Chirinos? You know what I mean? Like you going with a lifetime backup type dude?
Well, at that point, you're done, right? But that I don't think you're trading Contreras before the season. I mean, I think that's that largely depends on how they're doing. But here's the thing with Contreras, though, is I think they need to sign him before the season starts to an extension. It doesn't diminish his value any if they want to trade him come the trade deadline, which at that point, why would you, right? Then
he might even be more valuable at the trade deadline if he's hitting really well and you've got a team that's in need of that, like a catcher gets hurt late and you can run into somebody who's really desperate for it. You're not diminishing his value or his return that much if you trade him at the deadline versus this winter, even if you talk about those few months in between, just because a team there's not that many teams that are willing to compete. I know there is a market for his services, and there would be, and it could happen, but I just don't know that it happens. And if they do that, they're essentially waving the white flag that much earlier, and that's not good for ticket sales, right? Like, oh, we traded all your other favorites. Well, no, Contreras is still up. No, he's gone too. So sorry.
Yeah, well, it wouldn't surprise me.
All of your jerseys are outdated now. I'm sorry, fans. So that would be in the interest of fan service, it would be a very bad idea to move him before the season.
If there's one thing that I learned through all of this, now that you mentioned the jersey thing, it's that don't buy any type of merchandise with player names or anything on it. What I've got Chris Bryant stuff, Javi Baez stuff. I mean, oh man, fool me once, shame on me. Fool me twice. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. That's how that one.
Fool me 15 times and we're all idiots.
Hey.
But yeah, I mean, we can see what happens. I mean, there's a lot of different ways they could go. But again, if they do, that'll tell a lot. I mean, that'll like a move like that would signal entirely what their intentions are. I mean, I do believe, right, and this isn't even like Pollyanna rose-colored glasses. There is a relatively direct and simple path. Maybe I've even said this on here before, to them being competitive next year. And I'm saying, it doesn't take a lot. Like the Brewers are they going to get a repeat of all that stuff? So, and I will address this question. Do we think Ian Happ is worth his reported arbitration? I have a whole ass article on that. And I'm not trying to be like, I'm not trying to say that in a mean way, but I wrote like 1,000 words on that. So I probably won't rehash all of that unless we get some time in a couple minutes, but there's a fairly direct path forward that includes, and I think PKF up there kind of discussed it, but I can't respond to comments on here because I never do. Which is that you go out and you get a couple pitchers, you get a hitter, a bit, that could be Correa, that could be Nick Castellanos, They could do that. You have Brendan Davis, who should come up, even if it's not right away. And I'm not even talking service time. It's one of my more recent ones. It's from a couple days ago. It's got a picture of Hap blowing a bubble. If the site is cached properly and is actually showing you new articles, which hasn't always, hasn't happened for me. I went up the other day and I couldn't get anything newer in a week.
I'm gonna make it easy for you.
Yeah.
There it is.
There we go. And yes, so short answer is I do think he's worth it, because it's only going to be like $6.5 million, and that's really nothing. But you get like 2, and you don't even have to spend, like, we're talking, you could do that all for $50 million, probably 60 if you got the right guys, and so again, $60 million, and that sounds like a lot. But you rely on the farm system and maybe some minimum deals for the bullpen.
And at that point, you've got $100 million.
Right. You're still like, well, that's 60, and you probably got about 60 in commitments between actual contracts and then the new arbitration stuff. You're still like 125. You're still about 100 million low. 100 million below where they were like 3 years ago or 2 years ago, really. So we're talking about a fairly direct path. And if you did that, now all of a sudden, and you've also balanced the lineup, because keep in mind, Nick Madrigal, big time contact hitter. Frank Schwindel, big time contact hitter. Horner, contact hitter. Castellanos actually hits. He's got some solid contact, but he's got a bunch of pop. If you got Correa, good contact, good pop. You've got Wisdom, who has shitty contact but still has good pop. Ian Happ, shitty contact, good pop. Maybe Jason Hayward retires and they can put Brendan Davis out there. But you've created a much more balanced lineup. One that hits well in different circumstances against pitchers from both sides, and you've bolstered a rotation that then you throw in. Maybe you do still have 2 spots open. Maybe Alzolay and Steele, let's say, take some of those spots, and then you've moved at it like you have a team. I'm not talking World Series caliber, but you've now got a team that you've addressed some of the holes that you can go forward and kind of find out a little bit more. Okay, what do we really have? And then come next season, now you're like, okay, now we know exactly what we need to go get. Oh, and by the way, we're only at 125. We could add another 25 to 50 million to this payroll and get another couple of major pieces that we need to fill this out. So, I really believe they could be somewhat decent next year if they want to be. That's what it comes down to. Yeah, it's not a matter of can they.
Do they want the draft? Do they want another draft pick, or what are they really playing for next year? And it remains to be seen, because we've still got the CBA that needs to be finalized or agreed upon, or, so that's a big risk that's hanging out over all of this, right? We can talk about all this and none of it may matter if they don't come to an agreement in the CBA and there's a lockout or a strike.
Yeah. And then you get the market's all screwy, and then you could see that being the excuse of, we just didn't want to go get anybody because we didn't know what it was going to be. It's like, well,
too much uncertainty.
Somebody's still going to have to sign those players if there's going to be a season, but and you got to hope to God there is, because again, you would think that the Cubs would be very motivated for that. Although at the same time, we talk all we want about them having 70% of their revenue come from game day stuff, but guess what? If there's no games, they're not paying anybody, and it doesn't cost a whole lot to operate a team when you're not paying hundreds of millions of dollars to players, right? So you got to think about it that way. They might not be getting any revenue, but ain't nothing going out the door either, because it doesn't cost a whole lot to operate an empty ballpark with no players in it. And so, that's when you only keep in mind for 2022, let's look back on that. They only had to pay 36% of those salaries that were reported. So the payroll wasn't really $210 million. It was like 70. So let's keep that in perspective. But again, they have a lot of holes, but it's a really good free agent market. I do think there's a lot of guys out there who the Cubs could get who fit them well. A couple of them, and actually, while we're talking about this, and since I brought up that they need pitchers, and since I brought up that they could spend money, one player I don't think they'll spend that kind of money on is Marcus Strowman. Even though I think he's a great dude, I would love to have him as a person on the Cubs team, and I think he would fit really well in that rotation. I mean, he's a dude who gets a lot of ground balls. He throws a ton of sinkers. Like I said, doesn't give up a bunch of homers. Not a big strikeout guy, but he doesn't walk many batters either, and that's kind of an issue that the Cubs have run into trouble with, right? And a guy who keeps the ball down at Wrigley in the summer would be great. And he's just a good dude to have in that clubhouse. However, he's also going to turn 31 in May, right? So he's already 30. He'll be 31 in May. The reports are that he's seeking a minimum of 5 to 6 years at $25 million a year.
Yeah.
So you're basically talking about the John Lester deal, right? Let's compare. And I have said on here many times, like, they need to find their new Lester. But this team now is not the same thing as the team that Lester would have been coming into at 2015.
Exactly.
They're not carrying the same payroll. They don't have, because that team was like, oh, you got Javi Baez and Chris Bryant, and they had traded for Addison Russell. Oh God. Speaking of stuff that went off the rails, my God. Yeah. And he was short. So there were clearly a bunch of dudes who were like, oh, okay, they can call all these guys up and they'll be moving in here. And there were some guys who were coming around. So the window felt different, and they had been coming off of all those rebuilding versus just this kind of one immediate year. So I don't know that the timing is there. I can't imagine them putting out $150 million on a dude who's going to turn 31 in the upcoming season. So
yeah, I'd be very surprised to see that happen. As a matter of fact, I think there's zero chance.
Yeah, no, I don't think so. But Anthony brings up a good point, and this is something that I briefly touched on when I was talking about bringing in guys for higher average annual value and kind of maybe spending some money in the short term.
Yeah.
If they were to make some moves. So here's another way I could see them going is whether there's a number of guys out there maybe in this category. Kevin Kiermaier from the Rays, Will Myers and Eric Hosmer from the Padres, and we've talked about them on here before, is going out there and acquiring some dudes who actually do kind of fit a little bit, right? They need a little outfield help. Hosmer could, and especially if there's a DH in the National League next year per the CBA, which is probably going to happen. Hosmer can platoon with Schwindel. They could split duties there, or DH or whatever. But you take on that money, because Lord knows the Padres want to get aggressive still, but their payroll is going to be an issue. They're going to want to dump salary. You say, we'll take Hosmer and or Myers, and we'll take a couple of those prospects off your hands because we got the money that we don't mind paying them because we're not coming close to what our payroll limits are. Or Kiermaier, hey, how about you give us Kiermaier? How about you throw in a Tyler Glasnow with that package? And you know what? We'll just take that money off your hands, Rays, so you can get back under $70 million for next year. And bring up another prospect to play center field. And good Lord, Kevin Kiermaier patrolling center. He's a Fort Wayne guy, right? So that would be cool. But
if they don't
take that money and get prospects for it.
If they don't do that, I think it's a travesty. I really think they're set up perfectly to be able to do that, and I think it makes so much sense. They would have to give up. I don't even know a player to be named later, right? I mean, they wouldn't.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like you say, we'll give you a player to be named later and cash considerations in order to take on those salaries. And here's the thing. Here, you want to know where it really, really makes sense for them, in addition to just being, hey, you fill out your roster, you've built up prospects, you have short-term commitments, even if they're a bad deal, quote unquote. But you know what else it looks like? It looks to the average fan who knows these names like they're making moves to be competitive. These are dudes you've heard of before. Whether you actually know anything about them or not, it looks like they're and in effect, if you do know what's going on, it still looks like they're making moves to be competitive because they are filling out the roster for now, and they're loading up for this stuff in the future, and they're actually spending some money, whether or not that money means we're trying to be competitive right now or whether it means we're doing that to buy prospects. Either way, to me, that satisfies the needs and wants of everybody all the way around. I think it would be, I'm with you, it would be foolish for them not to do it, although it is funny because a lot of people are like, oh, why would we get these guys? They suck. Like, yeah,
right.
That's the point.
It's finished. That's the point. That's what we're saying. Is we're taking out a finished player that's got a big salary.
You say you suck, we will cut you. Like who's that? Tulo, right? That happened with him. The Blue Jays were like, sorry, dude, you're done. We're gonna eat the rest of the $50 million. Somebody else can go pick you up for the league minimum. That's the point, is that you're taking them to get the prospects, and because you know you're not going to come anywhere near even the top end of your budget for the payroll. So
you're basically paying cash for prospects. That's what it comes down to. Yeah, don't forget about Hosmer and forget about the names that you're getting in return. You're essentially paying money to get prospects. You're taking money off the Padres books and they're giving you prospects to do that
because they want to aggressively buy
more
more people, and because the Padres obviously look what happened to them, right? Speaking of guys who made a bunch of trades and it didn't pan out, but that's what I would personally love to see if they're not. And again, I'll add that. Hell, I'd love to see him do that in addition to Correa or Castellanos or somebody like that. But again, Castellanos a little bit older even, and so that's another dude who. Does he want to come in and have a year or maybe two that are in flux and that you don't know if they're going to be competitive? I'm sure he wants to get back to the playoffs and do some big things after, not really experiencing a whole lot of that there with the Reds. So, yeah, I mean, do both, right?
What
Go
did
out
he
there.
think was going to happen with the Reds? I mean, come on.
Well,
come on.
But I'm more surprised that he actually opted. Well, he didn't have a great year. Like this year, he had a fantastic year, but last year wasn't as good. And so it kind of felt like one of those where he's like, well, screw it. I'm not getting what I want. I'll get this. And, he had opt out after the first 2 years. Like that's kind of unheard of. And I'm sure he's going to exercise this one and get out of there. And, I mean, how could you not with the timing that he had of what a great season he just had. But I mean, it still sounds like he loves Chicago, and he's one of the guys that's out there that I could see who's just like, I love this city. I really dig the vibe there. I want to try to bring something back. Like, again, maybe that's corny and but he's one of them who I could see maybe taking a little bit less or the same versus I think there are some players you'd almost have to overpay to come and play for Chicago right now, for the Cubs anyway, not so much the White Sox. But, we'll see. But yeah, there are a number of ways the Cubs could go that, even if they're not trying to go full on for a division win or even a wild card or whatever next year, that they could actually go and spend some money on some players that really parlay some things into the following year. Because, Hayward's contract will fall off the books finally in a couple years, unless we've talked about he feels like retiring, which I don't think will happen.
Maybe he'll transition to the coaching staff.
Yeah, they can just do that. Make him the most expensive coach. Like, let's just turn this over. He can, but yeah, there's a number of different things they could do that would interest me. I'll say that. What the one thing that would just piss me off completely is if we do see them kind of fake go after some of these guys and end up falling back into the Descalsos and Souzas and just getting guys for the pure sake of filling out the roster that doesn't give them any benefit of getting prospects attached, that really doesn't do much, and that doesn't help them now, doesn't do anything for the future, and that essentially just gives them 26 men on the roster to field the team next year. That would be the really upsetting thing. It's not where the number of the budget is set necessarily. It's what they're able to do with it and how intelligently they spend, as Hoyer says. So I'm very interested to see how it goes.
Yeah. Well, there's plenty to speculate about, and God knows we're going to have a lot of time to do that. So that's good. Especially since, as the playoffs go on, there won't be any activity, obviously. And then the CBA, who knows what's going to happen with all that. So, hey, we might be talking about the same topic next week too, which we will have a show next week, I think. I'm going to be in town and not stuck somewhere in the world. So, yeah. So, on that note, I think we're over an hour. Let me just say, if you've stuck with us through the entire hour, we need to know who did, and we'll send you something, anything. Just put it in the comments. If you actually watched the entire show, let us know. And on that note, there we go. We got one. Anybody else? Just let us know. We'll figure out something. I've got something sitting around here. Paperclip or something I can send. Paperclip touched by Evan Altman.
Ooh, yeah.
Ooh, maybe you could autograph it.
Yeah. Where are we going to authenticate that? You get a COA with that, a certificate of authenticity. We're gonna
why not?
The little hologram stamp in there. That'd be kind of fun.
All right. So on that note, hey everybody, thank you so much for joining us. We will be back next week, I believe, and we'll probably be talking about a lot of the same stuff. So until then,
more than likely. See ya.